So I'm very excited about today's interview. I have Thomas Dreher, the CEO of Skjodt-Barrett Foods in Toronto. He was formerly the CFO of Skjodt-Barrett Foods, and he also spent 10 years at Kraft Foods, where I intersected my career with him, and also spent time at Imperial Oil and Tangerine. So I'm really excited to have somebody who started in finance. And I believe his LinkedIn profile actually says back office leader or something like that, and is now leading an organization and doing fantastic things in Toronto. And I had the pleasure of visiting Thomas's organization. And one of the things that really struck me was every single person I talked to stopped and said good morning and hello. And I work with a lot of organizations. That is very rare. So I think for me, I really want to peel back and talk about, what does a leader like Thomas try to do to build that type of winning culture where people love doing what they do? So Thomas, welcome to the interview.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me, Ron. I'm looking forward to it. It's been a long time coming.
There you go. So I want to start with some fun. So what do you do outside of work? And tell me why that's important.
I mostly spend time with my family. I have a wife and two girls. One's in university and one's in grade 11. So just trying to soak up as much of their time before my youngest goes away to university. And watching sports. I love football. As you know, I'm a Jacksonville Jaguar fan.
My condolences.
And the Toronto Raptors. I enjoy watching the Raptors as well.
Fantastic. And why is that important to just have some interests outside of work?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's really about getting recharged. Obviously, being in the role that I am, it's very stressful, has some long hours to it, and it's difficult to find time to just wind down. And so spending that time with my family, kind of zoning out and watching sports really just gives me the ability to recharge and come back ready to go at it on Monday.
Yeah, and that's a really important skill set. I know when I first got promoted to director, I really had a hard time separating work from home. And I had to consciously say, look, where are my boundaries? And it's very, very important. So I really appreciate that. Funny enough, I had somebody talk to me today. It's Friday. And they said, happy Friday, right? So I'm a little obsessed with saying, how do we people say happy Monday or not get the Sunday scaries as people talk about? So tell me what your advice is for people who maybe aren't as excited about Mondays. What are one or two things they can do to start loving life?
Yeah, for me, it's really about choosing your attitude. Someone once told me that we all have stresses outside of work, at work, we're always going through something, but when we walk through that door on Monday, it's really about the attitude and the choice we want to make around our attitude. So we spend a lot of our time in life at work, unfortunately, 35, 40 years. And so if you're going to spend that much time doing something, you may as well have the right attitude. And for me, coming in and starting strong on Monday is all about walking through the door saying, I know I got a lot of stuff to do this week. I know I got stuff going on at home, but when I walk through the door, if I can have a smile on my face and a good attitude, that may actually have an impact on somebody else that's not having a good Monday and maybe help them navigate through their challenges. So to me, it's really about attitude. It's tough sometimes, weekends are fun, but also, work does serve a purpose in our lives. And so let's just go in with the best attitude as possible.
Yeah, no, I really like that about, a very intentional choice. Choose your attitude. So you said smile on your face, come in and help others with that ripple effect. So tell me a little bit more about, hey, what's the attitude you bring every day?
For me, it's when I'm being very intentional about when I'm at work, I'm giving it my all. So then when I leave work, I can feel like I can shut it off for a couple hours, right? So when I'm in the workplace, I'm giving it 110% to be cliche about it a little bit, but it's also about having the right attitude, because there's about 1,000 people that work at Skjodt-Barrett, and I know a majority of them are probably going through tough times. And so if I can be there for them, have the right attitude, maybe I could be that little bit of a shining light to help them get through whatever they're going through. So I look at it as it's my purpose to be there, to live my way a certain way, to have an impact on those individuals.
Yeah, I think that's really powerful in terms of the role model. I mean, you at the top of the organization chart, I think your attitude, approach, energy really carries across. And again, back to what I said earlier, I think I saw it. I really felt people came with a smile on their face. I was sitting minding my own business in the lobby and just a big smile on people's face. So I really like that.
I would like to take credit for all that. But, our organization's been around for about 40 years. And I think that's the one thing that I've taken from Dan Scott, who's the founder and the leader of the organization, is he really took the time to build that relationships with people. And I firmly believe there's people that's been there for over 40 years, even though the company's only 40 years old because he started a company before that. And people will really go through a brick wall for the guy. And so when I sat there and I kind of observed his leadership style, it's like, what does he have that people are willing to do this, work the extra hours for, put in that little bit of extra effort? And it's really about how he treated people and how he was always there through the good times and the bad times. Because if those people have been there for 40 years, they've gone through some stuff in their life, and he's been there in those moments. And that's where you really get the most out of your people. They'll follow you as a leader because you are in a position, but if you really want them to follow you, they've got to believe in you, right? And I think that's what Dan started. And by me observing how he led the organization, not that I do it the same way he does, I do it in my own way, but I've been trying to carry that torch for him, because it's unbelievable. To your point, when you walk into our facility, it doesn't matter if you're getting a plant tour and you have a batcher out there, the batcher's going to acknowledge you and smile and nod their head at you. Like, it's pretty powerful. You don't see it everywhere you go.
Yeah, no, it's interesting because I have so much exposure to many organizations. I don't see that. So it was the exception to the norm, which is really, really interesting. Yeah. Usually people are putting their heads down. They're kind of not really, engaging. So I really, really like that. So you're telling me he invests that time getting to know people. And, we talk cliche family company, but I think there's really something there to building trust and loyalty.
Part of the reason why, when we're bringing in new people to the organization, we're really intentional about the culture, right? Because more than likely, if you're hiring somebody today, they all have the technical skills. Everybody's getting good educations. Everybody has a lot of work experience in North America, in the industry, whatever it is. It's really about, are they going to fit our culture? And our culture is really around not just coming in, doing 9 to 5 and leaving. It's coming in, giving it your all from 9 to 5. And if you have to work till 5:30 to give that extra effort, they're going to do it because they want to, not because a manager's, asking them to. And so to me, that's really about how we're going to try to continue, because if there's been people with our organization for 30, 35 years, they're going to start moving on to the next phase of their life. So it's really, how are we, as we're growing so drastically, how do we continue to bring in talent that fits our culture, that's willing to kind of work here for a little bit of a higher purpose than just coming in and getting a paycheck?
I really like that. So tell me how you select people. So let's say you have 5 people applying for a job, and you're trying to find these people who are going to fit your culture and go that extra mile for you. How do you filter through those candidates?
Yeah, really the process that we've been taking is having more than just one person do the interview. Because it's just like hiring somebody for technical capabilities. You see what's on a resume, but you don't really know until they get into the company, right? So it's the same thing with culture, but at least with culture, if you have 3 or 4 people that do the interview, they're going to pull out the culture thing pretty quickly. You can kind of tease out pretty quickly whether or not they're going to be the correct fit for Scott Barrett. So that's one thing. It may take a little bit longer to hire that candidate because you need to go through, 3 or 4 people, but I'd rather invest the time up front and get the right candidate than not get the right candidate, train them. It's not a good fit. And then you got to start the process all over again.
Yeah, no, I always look at Thomas, and he has the ability to bring in all-stars into his organization. I always send a message, hey, you got another big fish, right? But in all seriousness, I think he invests a lot of time in bringing in the right people. And I'll share a personal anecdote. So I was a candidate for a very senior job for him, and he did exactly what he just talked about. I remember having a 3-hour breakfast with somebody, and I met the owner of the company, and I met a few other senior leaders, and I went through that process. And actually, frankly, it was very good for me. Unfortunately, I didn't get the job, but a great lesson for me was I still remember the road I was driving when Thomas called me to say they had gone in a different direction. Very professional. I was super disappointed, but now I know it was the right thing for me and the other candidate. The other candidate is doing fantastic, a good buddy of mine, Jamie. And it's a good lesson to say, look, how do you hire people? And at the same time, what's the best experience for the candidates? Because I had a phenomenal experience. I met many people and I had a good sense. So I really, really like that.
Yeah, Yaron, I was wondering if you're going to bring that up. So I appreciate you being very vulnerable in that moment. And even for me, right? Because ultimately I had to make the decision between you and the other candidate, and you know how I feel about you, but also going through that interview process, there was a lot of questions about, Ron's still kind of undecided what he wants to do with his career. And, we're looking for somebody for the long term. And then when I look at all the success that you've been having over the last, 18 months and you thriving in it, it was the right decision for both of us. We may not have realized it at that time, right? So, kudos to how you handled that. But I think it helped propel you into the kind of direction that you're going now, right? Because this is obviously something you have a real good passion for and that you're thriving in.
Well, 100%. And at the time it was terribly disappointing. And even for me, it's a good learning that I pass on to a lot of my clients and coaches. And even as a parent, I tell my kids, like, sometimes those things are probably the most disappointing. You're going to look back on them and say, hey, what did I learn? And a lot of times something that maybe is better for you may arise. Right. So it was a really interesting life experience where I still remember that feeling, right? It's almost like my heart sank. But anyway, I totally agree with you. And one thing I loved about Thomas is he was willing to have that conversation with me. He just called me up, very professional. And he's always had that ability to just kind of have the tough conversation, make the decision in a pretty quick way, right? I've seen other leaders who sometimes deliberate. I think one common attribute you have is quick decision making. How did you get to that?
I see it in my regular life as well, like my personal life. We bought both of our houses when we were home searching on the first day. And I remember my wife going, we can't buy our house on the first day. We have to look at multiple. I'm like, it's everything that we want, And so I've always been pretty decisive. And I think just as you get more and more confidence with your experience, on the professional side, you build up that confidence of just saying, okay, I've heard enough, of facts. Let's just go ahead and make a decision, because we could continue to talk about this for the next week or two. But what new information are we actually going to get to change a decision? So I think it's always been ingrained in who I am. I'm probably sometimes make too quick of decisions. And so it works out sometimes and sometimes it doesn't. But I think it's just been who I've always been, especially when I think of the funny stories on the personal side of things. So,
all right, we'll get into those.
I got a lot of those too, if you want.
So diving into that. So do you just trust your gut? Like, do you just have a strong confidence that your gut feeling is what's going to be the right decision for you?
Yeah, I think for sure. But I also believe it is, you learn from the mistakes that you make, right? So if you make a quick decision, and we do this quite often at Scott Barrett, which I enjoy, of how we're a very flat organization and we can make quick decisions, and literally we can make a decision and in an hour it's being implemented on the floor. And I would say a majority of the time we get it right, but sometimes you get it wrong. But if you get it wrong, we're also quick and decisive enough to admit that we made a wrong decision and we go to the next option, right? So for me, it's always been about leveraging the entire team, getting the input from the entire team, because we're all looking at it from a different point of view, and then coming up with the best decision. And once we agree on that, why, belabor it anymore? Let's just move forward.
Yeah, no, I really like that. Can you think of a big mistake that you learned from either in your personal or professional life?
I would say one mistake that I've made on my personal or my professional side and impacted my personal side was, when I was at Kraft, Heinz had bought Kraft back in 2015. A lot of my friends in the organization were let go. I was fortunate or unfortunate to be one stuck around. I don't know how we want to look at it at this point in time. I think it was fortunate for me to be there. I stayed there too long. I allowed the money they were throwing at me in the long hours that I had to work to be successful in that organization really impacted my personal life. So I really got disconnected with my family, with my wife and my kids. And that's the reason why I left there, is because I just said somehow work became my top priority when work should be my fourth priority. And so, when I left Kraft Heinz, at that point in time, I just resigned, and it was really to rejuvenate myself and reconnect with my wife's, my relationship with my wife and my kids. All the signs were around me saying, this isn't the right fit for you, Thomas, but I just got caught in the churn of that organization. The same time, that led me to Scott Barrett, right? So as you were referring to our conversation that you and I had when you're driving that one time, you don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing at the time, right? Because that led me to Scott Barrett, and the last 7 years have been phenomenal. So it's like, I did get an awakening there to say, hey, this isn't the right place for you. It's time to, reconnect with your family. And I've been able to have a really nice balance of professional fulfillment and personal fulfillment at the same time at Scott Barrett.
Yeah, no, I really like you sharing that, because I do remember you kind of talking me through that. And I remember, I think you went on vacation. You made that decision on a vacation where you just had it, right? You were at the point where you were done. And it's just a good reminder for us to trust our guts. I know for me, I had like 6 or 7 different priorities at the end of last year. And I literally had to sit down and say, hey, what are the 2 I need to drop? As you said, it starts impacting your personal life, which is the most important. I totally agree with you there. So let's start stepping through your career. So I want to talk about Imperial Oil, Tangerine. You've got some good fundamental finance accounting experience. Tell me why that's important.
Imperial was actually a really good organization. When I first moved to Canada, that was my first job after getting my MBA. And the thing that I loved about Imperial Oil is they had, similar to Kraft, a kind of a finance management program. So every 18 to 24 months, you're moving to a different discipline in finance. So, I started in business controls, I went to tax, I did some financial reporting, and then I was in the treasury group there before I left. And it was great because at that time, and even today, I still don't know exactly what I want to do with my career, but I knew that I enjoyed finance. So that really gave me the ability to kind of see what I was drawing to and the things that I didn't like. So like, for instance, the tax role, I quickly realized that the tax role was not for me, but I also realized that I want to make the most of that opportunity because to be a finance professional, CFO, you do have to have tax knowledge. So there's no better way than to learn it than to actually do it. And I knew because it was a rotational type of program, I wasn't going to be stuck there for like 5 years, right? That's the thing that I really enjoyed about that organization. And it had been around for, at that time, like 150 years or something. And they had a lot of ingrained process, right? Like they had a lot of process, which is good, but not that much, right? So I really enjoyed my time there. I mean, they ended up moving their headquarters to Calgary at the time, and I had just moved to Canada. So I was like, I don't know if I want to move all the way across the country with my family at that time. So then that's when I went to Tangerine, and they were the complete opposite. They were the first internet bank in Canada. They had zero process. They're like, you want to do that? Go do it. And you're like, okay. They had an audit come in, and the audit said your treasury group needs to be separated from your transactional side of treasury because you need to have that segregation of duties. You need to set up a back office, right? So I was able to leverage all the business controls that in my treasury experience at Imperial and actually build a little back office team to help support that. So, for me, it was always about getting experiences and building on my career to ultimately at one time, hopefully to become a CFO and be, the top of the food chain when it comes to finance. But they didn't have a lot of process, right? So I didn't like that. So I realized wherever I wanted to go next, I wanted to make sure they had a lot of finance growth. So it needed to be a larger organization. So they had a larger finance team, and I wanted a little bit of a combination of some process, but not too much. And, that's where you and I ultimately met in food service at Kraft, and you being my manager back then. I still remember those are the good old days, man. We had some good times.
100%. And look, I mean, even just what you just said there, it comes back to choose your attitude, right? So you're saying, hey, great rotational program. There are certain roles like tax, which were not your favorite, but you still dug in and said, look, this is something I got to give it my 110%, to use your words. And look how that's paying off for you right now, right? Like in that CFO role. So getting a great rotational program, I think that's phenomenal. I love how you're saying, hey, then you contrast it with like no process, and you could bring in your learnings from Imperial. And then I really see how that's shaped your career to say, hey, look, I've seen the extremes. What's a way I can bring in some process, but still have quick decision making?
Yep. Absolutely.
Totally. Yeah. So back to our intersection is you were reporting to me and I was a newish manager, I think, at the time. Right. And I had a lot of people, but a couple of things struck me automatically when you joined. Number one, you were way more organized than anyone I'd ever met. So example, you'd come to me in January and say, here's my vacation for the rest of the year, maybe even the following. So I think, we've talked about choose your attitude. We've talked about how do you go into organizations and learn as much as you can, quick decision making. And now you strike me as a very organized person. Was that always the case, or did you have to learn that?
My organization skills are, I think, a lot different than other people. I don't have lists. I know my wife has sticky notes all over the house about the things that we got to get done. I've always just really narrowed it down to like, here's the 4 or 5 things. And that's just ingrained into my head. And that's what I focus on, right? So I literally just manage my email by what's in my inbox or things that I need to address. And if it's not in my inbox, I put it in a folder somewhere and I kind of forget about it unless I need it. So yes, I still do it's funny. I still do the vacation thing now. But the reason why I do that really gives me something to look forward to. So, when I set up a trip that, I've got something coming up in May, I know that then I can drive hard as I possibly can, right? Because I'm going to have that point in time where I'm going to recharge. Whereas if I don't have things planned, then it just feels like I'm going to be in this little bit of a constant grind from a work perspective. So it's funny, I still have my spreadsheet, even though, I'm top of the food chain here at Scott Barrett and nobody really looks at my vacation. I still plan to make sure I'm using the right amount of days and everything. So that's pretty funny.
Yeah, no, that's cool. And I still remember you used to go to Vegas once a year and go there and I think it was March Madness or something. You used to go and really have those times for yourself, right? Just to say, look, I'm going to earn it. I'm going to give it my all, but I'm going to really look forward to all these vacations. That's amazing. Yep. And then the second thing I noticed is right away you were able to connect with people on a very personal level, right? So at the time, me and you were in finance and we're talking about profit to all these people who really didn't want to talk about profit, but you had a way to just deal with whether it was the most senior person, VP, director, or the most junior person. You were able to connect with them. Give me some advice here to say, look, you're going into an organization or a department. How do you build that, relationship? How do you use your charisma? I love that approach that you always have.
Yeah, I think two things that come to mind is being vulnerable. I've always been comfortable sharing what's going on in my life, maybe not all the details, but I think when people realize that you're there just to do more than just work, that you're willing to open up of what's going on, like, hey, how was your weekend? But not just asking the question and walking away, but truly actively listening and then sharing things that are going on in my life. I find that then you're building that personal connection, which then makes the professional work piece pretty easy because people are willing to do that little extra thing for you if you've done something for them that's been, meaningful to them. So I think vulnerability is one that I still use in my leadership style today that I think is very, very impactful. And then the other one is being humble. All right. No matter where I've gone, whatever job I've had, I always believe when I'm in a room, I keep myself humble and say that there's smarter people in the room than me. And I truly believe that. I think what separates me from the next person is my softer skills and my work ethic, because there's a lot of smart people. So for me, it's being humble and saying, hey, I don't know everything, but together, collectively, we're gonna come up with a better solution. And so those are the two things for me, being vulnerable with people and being humble is really, to me, helped connect with people on an individual level, which then just makes the personal or the professional side of things a lot easier.
Yeah, I really like that because I always look at you guys, I think you're like the leader of the future, right? Like you're able to connect with people up and down the organization, where I think when you and I traditionally grew up in Kraft, it was a little bit like chain of command, right?
Yeah.
Analyst talks to manager, director, VP. To me, that's
it drives
obsolete.
Me nuts.
Yeah, it's obsolete, but it's really powerful. And the vulnerability piece, I think, is really important, right? A lot of leaders feel like they can't share or they don't want to share. And I think there's a real power in doing that because then people are willing to talk and listen. And even for me, a personal anecdote, I went through a real challenging business time in my last couple of years at Kraft. And the one person I used to come into his office is Thomas. I remember in that fourth floor, I used to come and you'd listen, and you'd just be that sounding board. And I think that's another really, really important quality of leaders. Okay, so let's go to Kraft. So you spent 10 years there. That's a long time. Tell me why.
Well, I would say it's probably three things. It was the people. I know everybody kind of says that, it's very cliche, but looking at all my network and my friends, a lot of them come from Kraft. We were all individuals that, worked hard. We were always competitive, fighting for the same jobs. But we always did it in a way where we were hanging out after work, right? So I think the people side of thing, it was important. And that's probably one of the reasons why I started not enjoying my time at the end, because a lot of the people that I had been with at Kraft had then pretty much left. And it was a whole new crew of individuals coming in. The second was the career growth. Like I said, the finance organization was quite large. They had a great kind of rotational type of program. They were really, in the finance group, really determined and focused on developing us. And so like all those things were things that I think every organization should have. It makes it a little harder when they're smaller organizations. And then what I didn't realize was the industry. I really like food, going there. I love going into stores and being able to say, oh, there's our product and there's our competitor that we're trying to crush, and actually being able to touch and feel the product. That's something on the bank. When I was at the bank, I really missed, because yes, we were innovative and we were coming up with new product offerings, but it was literally somebody programming in the back room and then all of a sudden it'd be on the website. So you couldn't really feel it and touch it. And yeah, you could see that there was money there because it was in, an accounting transaction, but you couldn't really physically see it and touch it. So those are the three things at Kraft I really enjoyed: was the people, the career growth opportunities, and then the industry that we were in. It was pretty dynamic. Hearing Delicio being removed from the Canadian marketplace. I know I got a couple texts about it. I know you were on the cheese desk for a while, and then seeing like Dan D'Alessandro making posts on LinkedIn. It's like, that was a great category when, we were all there when it was kind of introduced, and everybody rallied behind it. If it was always a good sales driver for us when we needed, and then just to see it's just going to disappear from the marketplace, it's almost like, oh, that's a little sad.
And I think there's so many things there. So the loyalty with our products. I remember I used to go into people's houses and check if they had Kraft cheese and literally want to throw out the competitor. And there's something there that us as even finance individuals, we had that business loyalty because we were immersed in the business. And then the second thing that's really intriguing to me, okay, so we've all gone through COVID. Organizations are now trying to figure out, do we come back in? Do we stay home? What's the balance? So how do you recreate, or what's today's version of that culture where we were more than just, hey, cranking out numbers and things like that? How do you create that in today's environment?
Yeah, that's where I would say we struggled during COVID. I mean, a lot of our salary employees were working from home for obvious reasons. It's hard to drive the culture we want when you hire somebody and then you're only getting on Zoom calls to have meetings, right? They can't walk around the office and seeing everybody smile and acknowledge you and wanting to have, these sidebar conversations. That's where I think ourselves as leaders in the organization really struggled. But as we're now coming back, we're having a hybrid model. I don't believe everybody needs to be in the office every single day if they don't have to be successful. But for our culture, we are asking them to come back 2 days a week. And we don't monitor it. We don't make sure people are checking the box that they're coming in. But it's important for having team meetings to have everybody in, because for the newer employees especially, we want them to start connecting with their peers, but also trying to understand who we are as Scott Barrett, because we're not a big brand in the marketplace. We're not the Kraft, we're not the Nestle's. So people don't hear about us on the street, even though we're a large organization and people love to work for us. It's hard to recruit, right? So we've got to keep that hybrid model, because there are a lot of companies now going to full time. So we're actually able to get a little more candidates that want to have some flexibility, but it's not until they can walk into our doors and interact with people. And now I'm seeing more and more people coming in, through COVID, when I was still going in, I was the only one on the second floor. Now I'm walking in and it's like, oh, I haven't seen you in a long time. And you can see people smiling and people are having sidebar conversations. And I think that's the value of having people come back in the workplace, but also realize not everybody wants to come in every single day as well.
Yeah. And I think there again, there's the magic of trusting people and being vulnerable. And again, if you have this check the box and everybody has to get, then people don't really kind of feel that's a genuine approach. So I think even I love the example where you're saying, hey, people are naturally coming in because they're drawn to the environment. So I really, really like that. So now you've left Kraft, you made that decision, you joined Scott Barrett as CFO. Tell me about that, that experience, and hey, what did you do when you first came in? For example, you told me about cutting the month-end process from 20 days to much shorter. Tell me about that experience.
Yeah, I would say I was probably naive when I was coming into the organization at that time. When I was leaving Kraft, I was not in the right place mentally. And like I said, I was going to take some time off. And then I got approached about this role, and I met Dan, the owner and the founder, and I met his son, Wes. And I'm like, there's something different about this place. They're growing the top line crazy. They seem to really believe that you can have work-life balance, but I was really skeptical at that time. But there was something about being with a family-owned company, not having to be concerned as much about quarterly results. So you actually can make the right decision for long-term, not just making a decision to hit a quarterly earnings or whatever the case may be. I think I ended up being off for about 2 weeks at the time, even though I was going to take 4 months, but that's okay. And when I came in, to be honest, the finance organization was really, really I would say young and immature for being around for almost 35 years. And you brought up one example. As I remember our first executive team meeting, we had one every month, and the current CFO that was at the time presented how we did from an EBITDA perspective, and how many pouches we sold. And that was it. And like, even in that meeting, people were like, well, why was our EBITDA higher or lower than last month when we did more pouches? Like, we don't understand. And so like, for me, that like, I left that meeting, like, I'm never going into that meeting again. Right. Like, that was not what that's not my style, as you know. So from that perspective, the next month, I literally had 10 slides. And I asked sales to complete one. I asked operations to complete one. And they're like, oh, okay, here's some visibility. Now, we didn't know all the answers, but it's all about moving in the right direction. And even that first month end close that you're referring to is we'd close in 20 business days. By the time you actually closed, the next month was already over. You know, if you did identify some slippage on labor usage or something, you couldn't even adjust that month because that month was almost over, right? And so I challenged the team. I'm like, I want to close in 5 days. What is it going to take for us to close in 5 days? Oh, it's impossible. The CFO at the time's like, you can't do that. It's impossible. I'm like, if we can close like a $4 billion company of Kraft in whatever, 3 or 4 days, I'm pretty sure we can close this organization in 5 days. And so we really just started peeling back the onion of like, what's stopping us from closing? I would say probably 2 months in, we got it down to 7 days. And then within 3 months, we got it down to 5 days. And it was, for me, it was just important to show a quick win, not only to the executive team that's leaning out on a new CFO, but also to the finance team that says, hey, like, you know, there are no boundaries to hold ourselves into. Like, let's think outside the box. Let's figure out ways to do this. And, you know, now the CFO that followed me, Jamie, he's just taking it to the next level, right? Like, I can't even ask the question about month end and he's already got the results to me. So it's just pretty cool, but it's all about moving forward and making these small steps. But I think the executive team valued that, right? Because they knew they were growing the top line and the bottom line wasn't growing as fast. And that's why I was kind of brought in. And so I could leverage all that experience that I got, you know, in the first 15 years from Imperial and Tangerine and from Kraft, and really kind of make it my own, you know, build my own finance team. They gave me the flexibility to do that. We had a lot of great people. And then we had some people that we needed to kind of move along because they weren't set for our culture and where we were going as an organization. It was probably one of the most fun roles that I've ever had, just because it was literally a clean slate, and got to build it up. And, you know, then started bringing in some of the people that I'd worked with in the past that had the same kind of mindset and I knew had the skills that could take us to the next level. And I think those people really thrive at Scott Barrett because they're able to do the same thing I was able to, right? When we brought in Brian Reeser to supply chain, he had, you know, 25 years of supply chain experience. It's like, you have a blank slate, you have X amount of people, here's where we're struggling. And he would come in and get those quick wins. And as a leader, you're like, I'm really making an impact on the organization and these people, right? And so that just helps fuel us continue to drive the growth that we have today.
Yeah, no, there's so many nuggets in there, right? So you came in and, you know, there was disbelief, but you said naively, but I think that was really powerful to say, okay, guys and girls, we're going to close the books in 5 days. So what's it going to take?
Yeah.
And you guys achieved it, right? So that belief as a leader really comes in handy, because I talk to a lot of organizations who are in a very similar place, and the CFO and VP don't have that belief yet, right? So until that person has a belief, then you don't ask the question, say, hey, why are we doing all these manual journal entries? Yeah. Let's reduce them, right? Can you remember any tactical things you did to get it from 20 to 5?
Yeah, I mean, one of them was exactly that. I remember it was taking us like, I think 10 days to do some type of customer true up analysis that we were doing. I think the overall amount of the entry, the dollar value wasn't very big, right? So it's like, well, you know, if it's always, let's say it's always between $60,000 to $75,000 a month, and we're just trying to refine what the number is, why don't we just book $75,000 as an accrual for the month, and then leverage the next 5 days to work through it and true it up the next month? You know, amazing. And so it was really that thought process of like, what's the materiality level we're talking about here? And if it's not very big, then why don't we just make an accrual for it and true it up? You know, like, they're like, oh, I guess we could do that. We've never done that before. Or like, you know, our accounts payable group would take 5 days. Well, why is it taking 5 days? Oh, well, we've got to do all these things. Well, let's just make an accrual for it. Like, let's use history to base an accrual, and then let's do the work. Let's not slow down the close process for 10 grand, right? Or 25 grand. We can get that caught up. Obviously at year end, when we got to do all of our financial entries for year end, we'll make sure we do it right, but we have more time to close at that point in time, right?
Yeah, no, it's really powerful because again, it connects to, hey, we're providing business results in real time as opposed to a month later, right? Where it's totally, hey, that ship has sailed. And you also mentioned, hey, I did a 10-page slide deck. Combine that with the importance of soft skills for finance, because you talked about that as well, right? That's something that we really need to focus on.
That's the value that a true finance professional brings, is being a partner and willing to get out of your lane of just finance, right? As we start to talk about potentially about how I got into the president CEO role, we'll touch on why I think that paid dividends for me. But, our leadership team, I find, was hungry for that type of work. I remember getting the sales slide. We completed all, by customer, by all the numbers, and we just gave them the actual slide and said, we just need you to do the commentary. I'm not asking you to put together the numbers. That's the exact same slide we're using 7 years later, right? But our sales leader actually has a desire and wants to share how the business results are going, wants to share the risk and the opportunities, but was not getting the support and didn't know how to pull the reports himself. Right. And so just being, hey, right out of the gate, here you go. We can tweak it. We can change it any way you want if you don't like it, but at least here's a template. And the only thing we're asking for you is commentary. And, and so for me, that really helped me early on in the organization build a really good relationship with our VP of sales. And, now that's just benefited tenfold as I'm in my current role as well, right? So we built up a lot of trust in each other. And so those are the small things you can do as a finance professional. Like, people are busy. If you're going to go to the sales organization and say, I need you to give me a report with the results and the commentary, you're going to be waiting a while, right? Because A, they may not have the skills to do that, and B, they're busy. So give them 90% of it and allow them to complete the 10% and give them 3 days. They'll do it, Yeah,
no, that's really cool. I really like that. And then the other thing is, as a great business partner, the curiosity muscle, right? I remember even with me, when I joined the company as VP of Finance, I was like, hey, what customers, what products? I was diving into the details, and it helped me understand the business better, right? So you become a good business partner where you can have great conversations with your business partner because you've done the digging, you understand it, right? And then there's total respect on both sides, right? In a business partnership capacity. Okay, cool. So you're the CFO, you're doing fantastic, you're changing processes, you're now in the CEO role. So tell me what that was like. Why do you think you got selected? And tell me how it's different for you as a CEO now.
Yeah, I think how I got selected was Dan, who's the founder and at that time was the CEO. We built a really good relationship. And I wouldn't say it's like, of course, it's a good personal relationship, but I think it's also on the professional side. Him and I saw eye to eye on what we thought the business is capable of, because he's got the mindset of, I want to take over the world, right? I don't want to be, even though he's going to be 70 this year, I don't think he cares if I share that. He wants to continue to grow. Right. And he feels that there's an opportunity for us to keep growing and to build an organization that is setting our employees up for success and for growth. And so I think he saw that in me, that we saw the same thing in this organization and that we could take it forward, as well as how I deal with people and the culture. We're connected from that standpoint. So I think from that, that really kind of started him to have faith in, hey, I don't need to be the leader of this organization. Maybe Thomas can take it over. So he wanted to step back from the day-to-day, managing people and some process isn't necessarily his forte. And so that's kind of where I jumped in there. I think that was them kind of testing the waters on me on whether or not I could jump out of a function that I've been in for almost 20 years and kind of get to it from a management standpoint. And then, a couple years after that, he's like, I really want to step away. I really want to start enjoying the next stage of my life. Would you just want to take president and CEO over, and I'm going to just be the chairman of the board? And so that's kind of the evolution. And him and I, even to this day, we still have, bi-weekly one-on-ones. So I keep him abreast of what's going on in the organization. But I think I owe that to him. It's his company. But at the same time, I get to bounce ideas off of him and, hey, Dan, this person, this is what I'm struggling with. How do you think I should handle that? So I think that relationship is really helped. But it started out with us being, I think, the same type of people and the thought process of what we wanted of the organization. And then as I got into the role, what's the biggest challenge? I would say going from a function leader where you're the subject matter expert, it's very hierarchical. Everybody knows you're the leader and everybody's like marching to the same drumbeat of, hey, we're finance people, we're going to close, we're going to run these reports, to now I'm actually having to manage the peers I used to work with, that they actually have the subject matter expertise in all those functions more than I do. So, how do I challenge them on something in sales when I've never been in sales? And so that's, for me, was, I think, where I've grown the most and took the most adjusting is, how do you manage very senior people that have more subject matter knowledge than you do? And so that's where, it's really elevating yourself to that strategic thinker. Here's where we're going as an organization. This is kind of what I need from you guys, delegating to them, trusting them, empowering them to do their jobs. And, our executive team, there's no egos, which is, I think, probably unheard of. And everybody there on the executive team is all about making Scott Barrett a better organization. And they truly believe that, and they're driving towards that. And so that kind of makes my job a little bit easier. I haven't had to deal with, I would say, executive team members that are struggling, because everybody there are pretty good high performers in their respective function.
That's amazing. And I think one of the things I've noticed, so I've watched you build this organization in a fantastic way. You hire the best and brightest. So tell me about, how do you go about doing that? Do you spend a whole lot of time looking at candidates, or do you go back to, hey, people you've worked with? What's your approach to bringing in the best and brightest?
I would say I have a lot of people that reach out to me asking for jobs, because I think they see the culture that we have and the people that we do have, and it's like, hey, there's got to be something unique about this place. Comes back to the culture fit, right? There's a lot of strong people that I admire and that I've learned from, but I wouldn't think that they would necessarily be a good fit for our organization just because it's their style, and may clash with our culture. So, when a role does come open, or we're thinking about doing a structure change where we need a new role, it's literally, we get the executive team together and say, okay, for this role, for the skills we're looking for, let's brainstorm on names. Right. And that's kind of what we did when I moved out of the CFO role, and how you got into the mix is, we said, okay, if we had a list of 5 people we'd want to bring into this organization from a finance and from a leadership standpoint, who would it be? Then I have a conversation with the individuals to see if they're interested. And then if they're interested, I kind of step away from it and let them meet the other executive team members or the function, and just let the process play out, right? Because it's not about me making the decision. I want whoever's going to be hiring that person to make the ultimate decision and make sure that they're the right fit. So that's kind of been our process. I am also cognizant of, I don't want to bring in too many people that we know, because, you don't want to be seen as just bringing in your own type of leaders. But for some of these critical roles, I think we've been pretty successful for it.
No, that's amazing. You talked about no egos. So do you consciously try and bring in people with that mindset, or do you think there's something about your leadership style, the organization, that generates that no ego mentality?
Yeah, for sure. If I knew somebody has an ego, they probably wouldn't make it to that top 5 list, because our organization's not really about egos. If we need something done, I will go out on the floor and do it myself, right? If there's nobody that can do it, because they have other things on their plate. So that's the type of people that we're looking for, that just really want to come in and give it their all every single day. And it doesn't matter what it is. We've had instances on in our organization where there's been some personal circumstances where they couldn't be available at our work. We just jump into those roles because we know that person has a lot bigger priority than Scott Barrett that they need to deal with. Take the 4 weeks off, go deal with that, forget about the distraction, and we'll jump in there and we'll do it. We'll get it done. We'll reprioritize if we have to. And, so that takes a certain type of person and leadership style that's willing to do that.
Yeah, no, I think I did an interview with Howard Bihar, the ex-president of Starbucks, and he talked about servant leadership, and all the things you're saying is exactly that. I just love how you're saying, hey, you're going to roll up your sleeves and make pouches if you need to. But many president CEOs wouldn't even think of that, right? So it's really, really powerful. And even just saying hello to everybody and just breaking all those silos and functions and hierarchies and all that is so powerful. And I love that you're running a successful organization doing that. I did want to get to learning. So I know I read a lot and I always bug you about reading. So I love the fact that you don't read books, right? And so tell me how you lead and how you learn and what's your approach to doing that?
My learning style has always been through observation. Like even if I think of university, I always did really well in classes because I would always go and attend class. I never missed any class because I could learn by observing. Then if there was tests that had a lot of information from the books in it, that's where I didn't do well, right? Because I could never really focus and translate what was in the book in my brain to how to execute it myself. So I've always been a big person of observing, and that's kind of from a leadership standpoint. As I've grown over the years, I've been very fortunate to have a lot of strong leaders that I've worked with, worked for, and seen. And not to say that they're the perfect leader, because nobody's the perfect leader. I would kind of take all the things that they did that were good and kind of put them in the back of my brain. The things that they put that I didn't feel they did well, and I put that in the back of my brain. And as I've evolved over my career, kind of formulated my own leadership style that worked for me with my style, right? If I'm talking to one individual in the organization, I need to approach them a certain way because I know that their personality, versus if I have a leadership style with somebody else, maybe completely different on the same topic because I know how to interact with them. So it was really about observing peer leaders, what worked well, what didn't work well, but then ultimately forming it into my own leadership style. So that for me, I would say it's observation.
I think everybody learns differently. Everybody has a different style. And I absolutely love the fact that you say, look, I learned through observation. And think about all the people you're surrounding yourself. You mentioned Dan, who's like, fantastic entrepreneur, and Brian and Jamie and all these folks. And I'm sure you work with a lot, the board of directors. I mean, that is really powerful to just say, hey, what can I learn? Both, hey, what's great that I can take forward and what's not great that I'm going to discard. It's really, really powerful. So I intentionally asked that because everybody gets there in a different way, and you're at the top of the organization. So you talked about, hey, I don't know what I want to do. I find that really funny as you sit in the CEO chair. So tell, what are you looking at in the next 10 years? Like, what's interesting to you?
Honestly, I don't know. My style, and I know this sounds very cheesy. Like people are like, what are your 5-year goals? You need to have goals. And for me, what's been worked out well for me, and now I'm on the later end of my career, believe it or not, I can't believe I'm saying that, is really never say no to opportunities that feel right. Even when I was at Kraft and they're like, hey, there, you got this job. Do you want it? I would never say no because I knew I was going to learn something from it. And all those things just paved my way to where I'm at today. And where I'm at today may be paving my way to somewhere else, or maybe write out my career here, right? But I also don't want to be, I don't want to be blocking somebody else from taking my seat as well, right? So I don't know what the next thing is for me. I don't know ultimately where I want to achieve, but I'm in a really good place right now. I feel I'm having a positive impact on 1,000 employees, and it's going to be more as we grow. We're able in this organization to do cool things for people to improve their lives. We did something really cool at the end of the year. And those are the things to me that I get a lot of fulfillment for. It's less about my job, and at this stage in my life, and kind of what I believe on my personal side of things is that I've been put in this position to really make a positive impact on people's lives. And for me, that doesn't mean I'm not going to keep driving the organization forward, because I firmly believe the more we grow, the more opportunity it's going to create for all the people in our organization. But I'm in a good place, work-life balance, my career, fulfillment that I'm getting out of every single day. I don't have it's a Monday, I don't want to go in. I have holy cow, there's a lot of things I got to do this week. For me, it's that higher purpose. And it's amazing to see people like Dan and the things that he's done for people over, the 38 years he's had this organization, and he continues to do things for people. Those things to me are inspiring. So I don't know what the future has for me, but we've got some cool stuff in the pipeline at Scott Barrett that's going to keep me pretty busy for the next couple of years for sure. So I don't really have time to think about what's next. I just go with the flow. I don't know.
No, and that's amazing. And I love how you left off saying it's our impact on people, right? That's what it's all about, is how can I take those 1,000 people and make their lives better and stronger and make their careers amazing. And so that's a nice place to end off. I really, really want to thank you. I feel like we could have gone hours on this because there's so much to learn. Choose your attitude, trust, vulnerability, stepping out of your lane. I'm seeing you swim into all kinds of different lanes. And look how that's led to the CFO role, the CEO role, and just a natural vulnerability. So Thomas, I really, really appreciate it. I love seeing your progress, and I want to continue to hang out with you, because that's the other cool thing about a CEO who I can have a beer with.
thank you for having me, Ron. I look forward to part 2 of this because I do, there's a lot of reminiscing that we've done on this call, and I think we could do it for hours, but thanks for having me. Hopefully whoever's going to listen to this, and I know there's millions of people out there listening to your podcast these days, there's a nugget or two in there that somebody's going to be able to take away and impact their lives, because I think that's ultimately why we're doing this. So thank you for your time, Ron. I appreciate it. And good luck to everything that you're doing. You're rocking it, and you're inspiring me, right? So, this is the cool part about having a network that is doing different things. Seeing you smiling and thriving, and your LinkedIn posts, it's pretty cool. I could never do that, and to see somebody like you doing it, it's inspiring. So, thank you for everything that you're doing.
Amazing. Thank you, Thomas.
Yeah, you got it.